Hi, everyone, and welcome to Identity Insights by Indicio. This is a new show dedicated to bringing you the news and unpacking new developments in the digital identity community. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Bloom to discuss the latest IIW. You would not want to miss the next one. Thanks for making time today, Daniel. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Daniel Bloom. I am a software engineer and team lead at Indicio. And my focus is on Hyperledger Aries and Indy, especially on the Aries Cloud Agent Python projects. So I've been in the space for a while. Started at the Sovereign Foundation back in 2018, and then switched over to Indicio in 2020.
All right, awesome. You recently went to IIW. Would you mind telling us in a few sentences what IIW is in your own words?
Sure, yeah. So IIW is an extremely productive conference. People get together. There's no set schedule. They just come with an idea of what they'd like to talk about. And then each day we present sessions of what we'd like to talk about. And it's just a very organic, self-organizing opportunity to talk with more members of the internet identity community.
All right, very cool. So who typically goes to this event? Is it open to the public? Is it more like focused towards developers such as yourself, or do you think an average person would get a similar experience?
It's a good question. It's definitely open to whoever would like to come. We've had anywhere from developers to very much in business, have no technical background whatsoever. We've also had professors show up at these conferences before, and trying to get ideas for classes on decentralized identity or blockchain more generally. So yeah, there's definitely a place for everyone, I would say, at IIW. If you want to talk more business, you can run a session on business concerns and decentralized identity or whatever related topics in IIW. If you want to talk about starting a class that covers decentralized identity, you can do that. If you want to talk about what's the latest that's been going on in the repository that you're working in as a developer, you can do that as well. So yeah, it's pretty open, and usually all of those different categories get quite a bit of interest from people, even if they aren't necessarily in that field. There's a lot of cross-pollination, I would say, where developers go to business things, business people go to technical things, and it's a really good opportunity to learn about what's going on in a lot of different facets of the community.
All right, cool. Yeah, what were some of the coolest conversations that you took part in or found at the conference?
Yeah, let's see. So being on the more technical side of things, I had a lot of opportunity to just kind of sit down and talk with people about what's going on in the developer community right now, I guess, especially within Aries. So able to talk about, let's see, did Indy especially, of course, which is something that we've been working on recently, but also just current developments on Aries Cloud Agent Python and the other code bases. So that's always kind of top of the line in terms of what I end up talking with people about. But what came up quite frequently at IIW this time around as well was machine readable governance. And this was something that I think we as Indicio wanted to talk about in advance of IIW. That was one of the things Mike was really interested in bringing up. And then it just kind of happened anyway. So even without us being the ones bringing up the session on the first day, first session, we sat down and it turned into a discussion of machine readable governance frameworks when the original topic was, is there a centralization problem in, establishing who's a trusted issuer or things of that nature. So there are a lot of conversations on machine readable governance, a lot of conversations on interoperability. That one, I think, really sticks out for people in the community. That's a really frequent topic at IIW and other conferences I've been to in the space. There's, as a frequent topic of discussion, there's not ever really like a resolution. It's not like IIW October 2019 or whatever, we checked that box for interoperability. It's an evolving thing, I guess. That was kind of one of the big conclusions actually out of our conversations on interoperability, was that we're still working on it. We're still at a point in the technology where it's not exactly clear which solutions best fit which use cases. And so we're all growing together and learning at the same time. And we see eventually down the road, we'll kind of settle into the technologies that help address our use cases, I guess. So yeah, lots of really good conversations that went on. And that's just a very small sliver of 3 days worth of really good conversations.
Yeah, that's super cool. So would you say that one of the main draws is, right, when you do go, you find new ideas or like new ways of looking at what you're already working on to kind of like maybe point you in a direction towards some problem you're trying to solve? Or
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think, especially within this community, I think people tend to be pretty heads down focusing on their thing. And there's an entire community of this sort of activity going on. So IAW is an opportunity for us to kind of lift our heads up a bit and look around the room and see what else is going on. So while we've got these parallel veins of thought going on in the community, there's the OpenID crowd, there's the OAuth crowd, there's the decentralized identity and DIDComm and verifiable credential crowds. At IAW, we all kind of come together, talk about the problems that we're experiencing on our independent timelines, I suppose, and we see the connections between them. We're able to say, hey, this is perhaps a good point for DIDComm to integrate with this other system or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely it's a good place to go and kind of get a feel for what's going on just across the community. It's a good cross-sectional view of what's going on.
all right, awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a great time. So I know, right, when you went, you had a few discussion topics that you wanted to bring up. How did that go? You mentioned Did India. I know it's a big one for us here in Indicio. So what did those conversations kind of look like around?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely went wanting to talk about Did Indy. But
Daniel, tell me real quick in your own words, what is the Did Indy method?
Cool. So yeah, the Did Indy method is a recent specification that brings the Indy community in alignment with the W3C Did core specification. So Hyperledger Indy actually originated or predates rather the W3C Did core spec. And as such, there is a bit of a divergence in how different problems were addressed in the two communities. So the Did Indy method brings Hyperledger Indy back to W3C Did compliance. And it also makes it possible for us to use a variety of networks from a single application, a single agent. So we can issue from one Indy network and verify from any other Indy network. Or as a holder, I can hold credentials that originated from Indicio, Sovereign, or whatever network, and present them all in a single credential. So the Did Indy method is again, bringing Indy up to compliance with the W3C Did core specification with native support for DIDs and DID documents, and also provides a namespace that allows us to reuse, or rather use networks. Dang it. That allows us to use any Indy network that we would like to within our applications, and multiple Indy networks, which is a Code with Us opportunity that we just wrapped up with the government of British Columbia. A lot of the crowd that was attending the Indy Did method calls and participating in that work were not able to go to IAW, so it was kind of my opportunity to represent, I guess, the community, that side of the community at IAW. So that was definitely high on my list of things to talk about. So I ran a session, I think it was on the second day of the conference. Had some really good conversation and had a lot of really, let's see, we had the right people in the room, I'll say. Drummond Reed was there, Marcus Sabazello was there, Sam Curran was there, as well as lots of other people from various communities. and we were able to talk about what's been going on with the Indy did method work, a little bit about the did method specification itself, and some of the unique aspects of the Indy did method, and got some really interesting input from Marcus during this conversation as well. Marcus Salvadello, who's really a pioneer in the did resolution and did URL dereferencing space. And we kind of got his blessing, so to speak, on a did URL mechanism, which is kind of pioneering in the did method space that we're using to reference different objects on the Indy ledger, such as non-creds objects. So down the line, we see this as a really critical piece of interoperability, of being able to use the non-creds in different ledgers and ecosystems. So it was really good to kind of get that perspective from Marcus and get his input, which was, of course, extremely valuable. We also had Drummond Reed there, who is very involved in the Trust Over IP Foundation. I couldn't tell you his exact role there right now off the top of my head. But he really emphasized the importance of what Indy as a network of networks affords us within the governance and adoption side of this problem we're tackling of getting decentralized identity to the world. So using did Indy, we've made an even better case for Indy networks as a private ledger for organizations who need that sort of a guarantee on their networks. So yeah, some really good input from Drummond, and then some really good conversation about Indy more generally in that session. So yeah.
Awesome. Were there any particular questions about it that really raised some interest to you as a developer and someone who's been working on it a lot? Like what kind of steering questions that made you think like, oh, we need to integrate that capability or something into it? Were there anything like that? Or
yeah, that's a good question. So what was actually surprising to me was, so I went in with an idea, of how it would go. And fortunately with the flexibility to go wherever the conversation went as well. So after spending a lot of time, heads down in the code, doing this work for the Indy did method, what actually took me a bit aback during the session was that a lot of the questions were a little bit more, I won't say basic exactly, but like it was more like Indy and the non-creds in general, and it was an opportunity to kind of sell Indy itself again to members of the community and say Indy is really good at doing these things, and it's a really good candidate for these use cases, and kind of just getting back to basics and then kind of tying in did Indy as this is more of the goodness of Indy, just making it more accessible, more interoperable, and more opportunity for us to take advantage of the specific benefits of the different networks out there, such as Indicio. I would say Indicio is pretty general purpose, but there's ID union ledgers, which is a jurisdiction specific ledger in the EU, and there's others that are just popping up as needed for the legal circumstances of those locations for those networks. So yeah, there were some really good questions that kind of just circled back around to the whole point of why we use Indy, and yeah, it was a good discussion on that front.
all right, awesome. That's cool to hear. There's a lot of different it sounds like maybe levels that could all kind of benefit from your talk and learn something there. So that's awesome. If someone's on the fence about going to this conference, what would you be as like, this was a major selling point that I took away that I think you could benefit from as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's see. I think the biggest selling point that I can bring up for IAW is just the bandwidth of the conversations that you can have at IAW just outshines anything you can have over Zoom. Like it just the amount of stuff that you can get done in a 3-day time period is just ridiculous. Everybody's there, all the people, all the interested parties that you need to interact with, they're all in one place at one time. And you can put everybody in a room together and then just duke it out over whatever, blockers that you have as a community, as a technology. And it doesn't come to full resolution usually at IAW, but it advances the conversation so much further, so much faster than anything that we could have asynchronously and online. Like easily months worth of work can be accomplished in just 3 days at the conference. So that's always one of my huge takeaways from IAW, is just how productive they are, which is what I started with, I guess. But it's also just an incredible opportunity to network and form connections with different sides of the community. Like I said, all the interested parties are in one place at one time, so you're able to sit down with people that you might not necessarily get a lot of time to interact with. Like I was able to talk with Marcus Salvadello a few times about, did URLs and resolution and registration of DIDs. And, Marcus is a really cool guy. He's very responsive online, but it's just, you don't get to have those sorts of casual conversations spur of the moment when you're not in person, I guess. So yeah, to circle back around, it's just an incredibly productive opportunity to speak with lots of different people at one place and at one time. So,
all right, awesome. Well, that sounds like a great time. So it looks like we are out of time, Daniel. I do appreciate you joining me today. If you want to see more of Daniel and learn more about his subject, the Divinity method, you can check out the upcoming Indicio meetup, where he'll be going through the topic in detail. The link will be in the description. To learn more about IAW and how you can get involved in the next one, you can also check out their website, which the link will be in the description as well. If you have any questions or any topics that you'd like us to cover or learn more about, please leave a comment below. Thanks again, Daniel, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Tim. I also have an opportunity to speak on a podcast that's hosted by Joe Andrew and Erica Connell. It is called the Rubric Podcast. You can find it at rubric.cc, where they basically review DID methods and talk about the people and communities behind these DID methods. So that'll be coming out in the not too distant future. I think you can expect that mid-May.